Mario Balotelli was supposed to be a superstar, not just a good player, not just another promising youngster, a superstar. At 20 years old, he had already won the Champions League, joined Manchester City for around £22.5 million, and was being described by Roberto Mancini as one of the best young players in Europe. 2 years later, he was scoring twice against Germany to send Italy into the European Championship final. He had the talent, the confidence, the personality, and seemingly everything needed to become one of the greatest strikers of his generation. So how did it all go so wrong? Balotelli's career isn't really a story about a player who wasn't good enough. It's the story of a player who was good enough, but could never consistently show it. Balotelli's rise was ridiculously fast. After making his professional debut for Lumezan as a teenager, he joined Inter Milan and quickly forced his way into the first team. He made his Inter debut in 2007, and just 3 days later, he scored twice against Regina in the Coppa Italia. This wasn't some unknown teenager slowly developing in the background. Balotelli immediately looked different. He was powerful, technically gifted, incredibly confident, and had an ability to score goals that made you wonder just how high his ceiling could be. And by 2009-10, he was part of one of the greatest teams in European football. Inter won Serie A. They won the Coppa Italia, and then they won the Champions League. Balotelli was only 19. By the summer of 2010, Manchester City came calling. They paid around £22.5 million for him and reunited him with Roberto Mancini, the manager who had given him his first-team opportunity at Inter. And Mancini wasn't shy about his expectations. He believed Balotelli was one of the best young players in Europe. And for a while, it looked like he was right. Balotelli arrived in England with an enormous reputation, but there was one problem. Balotelli was Balotelli. The talent was obvious, but so was the chaos. There were disciplinary issues, bizarre incidents, arguments and moments where you simply couldn't understand what was going through his head. But underneath all of it was a ridiculous footballer. In the 2011-12 Premier League season, Balotelli scored 13 league goals, despite playing just 23 matches. And then came the moment that would define his time in England. April 2012. Manchester City needed to beat Manchester United at the Etihad to take a huge step towards winning the Premier League. City won 1-0. And as Balotelli celebrated, he lifted his shirt. Underneath it was the famous message, "Why always me?" It was the perfect Balotelli moment. He was controversial. He was unpredictable. He was incredibly talented. And somehow he always ended up at the centre of everything. A few weeks later, Manchester City won their first Premier League title. Balotelli had played a part in it. At just 21 years old, he had already won the Champions League and Premier League. But then came the summer that made him look like a genuine world superstar. Italy entered Euro 2012 with Balotelli as one of their biggest attacking threats. And in the semi-final, they faced Germany. This was the game where Balotelli looked like the player everyone had been waiting for. First, he rose above the German defence and powered a header into the net. Then, he raced through on goal and absolutely smashed his second past Manuel Neuer. 2 goals. Italy were going to the final. And Balotelli celebrated by ripping off his shirt and standing there, arms out, staring at the cameras. It became one of the most iconic images of the tournament. He had just destroyed Germany in a European Championship semi-final at 21 years old. This was supposed to be the beginning, the moment where Mario Balotelli finally announced himself to the world. And yet, it was almost the peak. UEFA records the 2 goals as the goals that sent Italy into the Euro 2012 final. Just months later, Balotelli was back in the headlines. But increasingly, the stories weren't about what he was doing on the pitch. And eventually, Mancini had enough. Balotelli left Manchester City in January 2013 and returned to Italy, joining AC Milan for around £19 million. And initially, it looked like the move had worked. He scored 12 Serie A goals in just 13 appearances after joining Milan during the second half of the 2012-13 season. Then, in the following campaign, he scored 14 league goals. The talent was still there, but the consistency wasn't, and eventually Milan sold him. Liverpool came calling. In 2014, Liverpool paid around £16 million for Balotelli. And on paper, it made sense. Luis Suarez had just left. Liverpool needed goals. Balotelli had Premier League experience. He was still only 24, and this felt like another chance for him to prove that he could become the superstar everyone had expected. But instead, it became one of the biggest disappointments of his career. He scored just one Premier League goal. One. The player who had once scored 13 league goals in 23 games for Manchester City could barely find the net at Anfield. And after just one season, Liverpool sent him back to Milan on loan. His career was beginning to drift, but then something strange happened. Balotelli went to Nice, and suddenly, Mario Balotelli was back. In the 2016-17 season, he scored 15 Ligue 1 goals as Nice finished third in the league and qualified for the Champions League qualifying rounds. He wasn't 20 anymore. He wasn't the wonder kid everyone was waiting for. But for one season, he looked like himself again. The goals came, the confidence came back, and for a moment you could almost convince yourself that there was still a superstar hiding underneath everything. But it didn't last. His career continued through Marseille, Brescia, Monza, and clubs in Turkey and Switzerland. There were flashes, there were goals, there were moments where you thought, maybe he's finally figured it out. But then, the next setback came, and the cycle repeated itself. That's the difficult part, because blaming everything on Balotelli being lazy or unprofessional is far too simple. He clearly had problems with discipline and consistency, but he also suffered injuries. He changed clubs constantly. He struggled to find stability. And perhaps most importantly, the expectations placed on him were enormous from an incredibly young age. He went from being a teenage sensation at Inter to a Champions League winner to a £22.5 million Manchester City signing to scoring twice against Germany in a major tournament semi-final before he had even turned 22. That's an insane amount of pressure. And maybe the biggest tragedy is that we know how good Balotelli could be, because every time people started writing him off, everyone would say, maybe this is it, maybe he's finally back. But the next chapter would usually tell a different story. Mario Balotelli didn't fail because he lacked talent. That's what makes his story so frustrating. He won the Champions League at 19, he won the Premier League at 21, he scored twice in a European Championship semi-final. He had seasons where he looked completely unplayable, but he never managed to turn those moments into a consistently great career. And that's why, years later, people still ask the same question. What if? What if Balotelli had found the right environment? What if he had stayed at Manchester City longer? What if he had reached his full potential? Because maybe the saddest thing about Mario Balotelli's career isn't that he became a bad player. It's that we got just enough glimpses of the superstar he could have been to know that the potential was real. Mario Balotelli was supposed to be a superstar, and maybe that's the biggest what if of them all.